Hello, eighth grade. At the end of the today's video, I'm going to show you a section on the poverty and on the tenements of the Lower East Side, and I'd like you to take notes on that, of course, as well. Describe based on that video. I'd like you to elaborate on. Sorry, notes on the video. I'd like you to elaborate a few sentences on what life was like, based on your impression of the video, what life was like living in a tenement slum in the Lower East Side. But I'd like to begin with showing you a picture, a very famous picture, and that's going to require me moving my camera. And trying to get it. This is a very famous picture. Take a look at it for a moment. What you see here is, as it says in the caption here, which you cannot see, a Jewish cobbler, that means a shoemaker, in his cellar. He lived in a coal cellar where they used to store the coal to heat the building. And on Erev Shabbos, you can see the challah on his table. This is where he lived with his family, the challah on his table. And you can see the sign in Yiddish towards the side here, which he was used during the week, I'm sure, to advertise his profession. Now, take a look at his face. Look how, there's a term we used to use, shell-shocked, but they would say traumatized. There's a picture taken early in New York in 1887, but this tells us something about what Reb Moshe Feinstein used to say. It captures this picture. Reb Moshe Feinstein was asked once, why the children of Jews like this went off the derech in large numbers. Most of the from Jews who landed in New York did not remain from, and I'm sorry, they remained from, but their children not remained from. Let me readjust this camera now. So they, why was that? Why? So he says, and the question he asked was that they were Shomer Shabbos. They were Moser Nefesh. They sacrificed so much to be Shomer Shabbos. Those days, people would go to work on Monday, and knowing that they'd be fired on Friday because they would tell their employees they need to go home for Shabbos. It was very hard to find jobs where you didn't have to work on Shabbos. A lot of people were not omed in that Nisayon. A lot of people did not actually were not able actually to withstand the temptation. And you should write this down. The idea of Ashkama minyan, an early minyan in shul, originated in those times when people who still could go to shul on Shabbos felt they had no choice to support their families but to go to work afterwards on Saturday, because Saturday at that point was still a work day. There was no 5-day week back in the late 19th and early 20th century. So they wanted at least to daven in shul, in a minyan, before they went to work. So therefore, the Ashkama minyan came about so they could daven early in the morning and then go to work afterwards to their job, even on Shabbos. So the other people who did not go to such minyanim and did not go to work on Shabbos, they were most nefesh. It was they gave up their livelihoods every week sometimes in order to keep Shabbos. So why did their children go off the derech? Why did their children not stay from? So the Moshe said that to sacrifice was something which was, you could see in the face of this person, which you saw, which was just, he had no idea what he was going to do in this world in order to make his living the next day and the next day. And they entered Shabbos in that traumatic situation, in utter poverty, living in a cellar where they stored coal. This is something which was very prevalent in the Lower East Side of Manhattan when the Jews started coming in masses back then in the 1880s. As a matter of obviously, there was no proper education for children. Most children had to work, and if they didn't have to work, or in the time when they did not go to work, they were sent to public school because they needed to get ahead in this land. They had to learn all the basic knowledge which was necessary in order to get the advantages that their parents could never have and never anticipate. That's at that time it was that America was called by the rabbinic world. You should write this down, of course. Like everything else I gotta write down. It was called Reka. Reka in Aramaic is then is Reka in Hebrew, which means empty. It was a nation which was empty. There was no great learning going on, no profound Torah learning going on, and the country was basically had no significant learning Torah. What did they have in terms of learning Torah? I'll come to in a moment. But the poverty was such again that children either went to school, public school, or worked, or both. The learning took place in a new American institution, which didn't exist in Eastern Europe, which is called the Talmud Torah. A Talmud Torah is a school where you go to on Sundays and after your regular public school day is over. They still exist to this day in conservative and reform Jewry, almost not in Orthodox Jewry except in rare places. But that was the main learning Torah which took place in Talmud Torahs. Okay, that was the organized learning. It took place and of course it took place after school. The teachers were miserably paid because they had to collect the money from poor people to pay these teachers, and the poor people themselves didn't have money to pay. So therefore, they were miserably paid and miserable, and probably miserable people as a result, because they too were in the depths of poverty, and there were no real school buildings until much later where people could meet in good conditions. So they took place in crowded and untidy conditions. And they, of course, took place after school when, imagine coming home from school at 4 o'clock or whatever it is, and then having to go to another school. Clearly, they're built up in these children a tremendous resentment to the schools to which they had to attend. So Talmud Torahs were very often seen as a way, described very often as the gateway out of Frumkeit because of the great turnoff of having to go to that type of school. The first real elementary school as we know it today was, in other words, as a yeshiva day school, was Yeshivas Eitz Chaim, which was founded in the Lower East Side. There was one which was founded shortly thereafter in Baltimore, the Talmudical Academy. But the Eitz Chaim was the first one, and that eventually, although it's no longer an elementary school, became Yeshiva University, and Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yitzchak Elchanan several years later. But that was first, and was obviously only for boys. No girls, no Orthodox girls schooling existed until the 1920s, at the earliest, if I recall correctly. And the boys, the very few boys, obviously could attend a school like this, which was limited in size and capacity. But eventually they built a modern building in Lower East Side where the Talmudical Academy later started, Talmudical Academy of New York, not to be confused with the one in Baltimore, but which later became MTA of today. And that was in the early 1900s. And this was also revolution because it was the first yeshiva high school to exist in the entire country, and it set the tone for all other yeshiva high schools. Now, the main problem which Jews faced in the United States at the time was kashrus. And the main function of rabbis was to supervise kashrus. And kashrus was a crooked business. And I accepted by myself to limit these videos to more or less 15 minutes. So we'll have to talk about kashrus next time because I'm going to attach a 5-minute video to this. But kashrus was a terrible, terrible situation. It killed basically the first and only chief rabbi of New York, Rabbi Yaakov Yosef, or Rabbi Jacob Joseph, known also as RJJ. The Ridbaz had to flee. There was a great rabbi in Chicago, had to leave Chicago by train on Shabbos because he was being pursued by the mafia, gangsters at that time, and they say perhaps he had a bullet in his leg already. So that's something which we'll talk about next time. In the meantime, again, remember to take notes on this video.
Many people think of the Lower East Side as a place for hipsters, cool restaurants, and bars. But this neighborhood for decades was a place where millions of immigrants came to escape persecution and poverty and to live the American dream. They built New York City to its greatness, and you can learn more about their stories when you visit the Tenement Museum located at 97 Orchard Street.
This is a place where you can learn about the waves of German migration, Irish immigration, Jewish immigration, Italian immigration, all of it that came between 1863 and 1935 is housed here.
Here in an actual tenement, which was home to over 7,000 immigrants during a 70-year period. The building was later restored to tell the story of how immigrants shaped New York.
Unlike other historic houses that focus on famous people, industrialists, or presidents, or writers, here the focus is on ordinary people. What was daily life like for a tailor, for a housewife trying to make ends meet during the Great Depression? What was it like to be a German saloon keeper and saloon keeper's wife who are trying to feed all the German immigrants who've come into the neighborhood?
What makes this museum unique is learning the stories of the people who lived here by educator-led tours through their restored apartments, like visiting the Levine family apartment, which was also a garment workshop.
We're standing in the recreated apartment of Harris and Jenny Levine. The average tenement apartment size was about 325 square feet. You had a parlor, a kitchen, and a smaller room, which usually served as a bedroom. Keep in mind that depending on the era, depending on the time, most rooms served the purpose of a bedroom. You'd unroll mattresses or put chairs together to create beds to house all the people living here. In addition to the 5 children growing up here, Harris and Jenny would have hired at least 3 other workers to help them produce the dresses. And keep in mind, although that dress is made in a tenement apartment, it's going to go to Macy's or it's going to go to a catalog. Certainly not Jenny Levine. Jenny Levine will not wear that dress. She just makes the dress, or her family makes the dress.
By the early 1900s, the Lower East Side was the most densely populated place in the world. Reformers like Jacob Riis and Lillian Wald uncovered the horrible crowding and unsanitary conditions of the tenements.
This is the toilet, and this was a big deal because this is a huge improvement over what had been, because what had been here was nothing. People, when they used the bathroom, had to go outside and use privies. When the toilets came in 1905, and they only came in because of the 1901 Tenement Housing Act, which required toilets. And it was a big deal. And you can see right behind the toilet is a window onto an air shaft. That air shaft had to be cut out of a building. And so what that means is what had been a bedroom for the apartments had to be basically erased because they needed to have the air shaft in order to ventilate the toilet.
When you tour these family apartments, so many parallels can be drawn to immigrant groups today in the city.
Our tour Shop Life that talks about the stores of immigrants, you start with the German family, the Schneiders, John and Caroline Schneider, who set up a saloon. In that saloon, immigrants came to read German newspapers or listen to German music. They also came to debate politics. You can walk around Chinatown and see many clubs and many societies where you see Chinese men starting to talk about politics. We have 5 building tours, and so depending on which tour you go on, you're going to see a different floor of the tenement, and you'll see 2 apartments, usually 2 families, or you'll see several stores. Not only can you tour this building in all of its detail, you can tour the neighborhood through 5 different walking tours.
Even a food tour of the Lower East Side. Beginning from a shuttered tenement in 1988, the Tenement Museum now attracts over 200,000 visitors a year. With so much variety of tours and educators, people can come back again and again to get a new perspective on the immigrant experience.
Our whole city is shaped by the work of immigrants, and this museum tells the story of some of those early workers. And because our mission is to connect past to present, when you come here, it's not just entering a dollhouse to learn about history and, oh, isn't that cute? It's really to learn about history, to understand the dynamics that are playing out outside on the streets of New York today. So you should come here if you care about New York.
The Tenement Museum plans to continue telling the story of immigration to New York City by expanding in 2017. That expansion is going to take place here at 103 Orchard Street, just above the Visitors Center. They'll be focusing on the stories of Chinese immigrants, Puerto Rican migrants, and Holocaust survivors who settled here after World War II. I'm Mike Gilliam for Arts in the City.